So maybe let's kick things off here. So how or when did you know that you wanted AI to be your life's work? Because I've seldom come across people who have been in this industry for, well, I guess given, I'm only 26, so I don't have much experience to speak of, but, it's something I find when I meet people who are like, my entire career has been in artificial intelligence. So how did you know that you wanted AI to be your life's work and your career?
It's an interesting story. Well, interesting to me at least. We'll see if it's interesting to the audience. I developed two interests during my undergrad and grad school days. One was statistics, and the other was what was then called AI, but it's actually very different from today's AI, and I'm sure we'll get into that.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Back in the 70s, late 70s at Towson University, I taught statistics techniques like classification and regression. They weren't called AI back then,
Mm-hmm.
but today, most of the amazing AI systems out there, including facial recognition and machine translation and speech recognition, use classification techniques, the same basic idea, but now they're based on deep learning, which
Mm-hmm.
enables more powerful computations. One of my first jobs was to use supervised learning to predict horse racing outcomes in 1979 for the top supplier of data to New York area bettors. And that was a
Really?
lot of fun. Yeah. And then when I was in graduate school, actually, that was while I was in graduate school, my graduate school advisor was Bert Green. Bert Green in 1959, when he was at MIT, wrote the first natural language processing program. He wrote a program appropriately called Baseball that answered questions about the 1959 baseball season. And then I met Roger Schank, who had arguably the most important natural language processing lab of its time at Yale University, and ended up doing a postdoc at Yale and then
Wow.
helping Roger start an AI company in 1981.
Wow. So your experience, let me go back to, you said you worked on, um, you said it was supervised learning for horse racing.
Yeah,
So
yes,
horse racing in terms of like betting on horses, or because that
yeah,
sounds interesting.
exactly. So back in 19, I think it was around 1979 or 1980, and really still today, professional sports bettors and serious sports bettors tend to buy data
Mm-hmm.
and analyses. And in 1980, in the New York area, New York, New Jersey area, the leading provider of horse racing data was uh, Lenny Ragozin. And through a friend of a friend, he heard about us and hired my partner and I to write a um, statistical classification tech. Actually, it was a regression program that
Yeah.
would take his data and predict the true odds of the different horses in a race. So
Wow.
then bettors would take that data and say, okay, the true odds are that this horse is 3-1 to win the race, but they're going off at 10-1, so that's a good deal for me. So I'm going to bet on that horse.
Yeah. So did anybody? I'm guessing people use that in the wild, right? Like people were using this actively to make bets, or was this more of just an experimental thing?
Oh no, no, no! This was people were
Wow.
actively using it to make bets, and it you know it only lasted it was there was only an advantage for like a year or two because um, pretty soon every provider of data was using similar regression techniques.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like we had really invented anything ingenious. Yeah,
We'll see, and that's kind of why I wanted to ask about that, because I think, and we may get into some of this. I still feel like there's this great mysticism around AI, right? You and I talked about this in our intro
Yeah.
meeting, and I think it's just so cool and fascinating that a lot of what's common in 2021, you used to build something that could help people bet on horse races more effectively in the 70s using similar tech.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, it wasn't. This was just more of an experiment. But we took data from baseball, and we created a set of predictions that we published in the New York Post before the
Really?
season, and we were able to predict 3 out of 4 of the playoff teams.
See? When you have AI, you don't need Back to the Future where you go and collect the sports book that gives you all the betting stuff. You can just use a model like you built to predict the outcome of a playoff series.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And actually, believe it or not, today, even in today's world, when people use AI and they apply it to data, a lot of times you don't need the new deep learning techniques.
Yeah.
You can get away with the same linear regression techniques that we were using back then, and and get a comparable result.